In 1975, Travis Walton was 22 years old, and he would claim that he was abducted by creatures from another galaxy. His friends and work colleagues witnessed the abduction and would go on to be actually accused of Travis's murder when Travis would disappear for 5 days and 6 hours. So we're going to get into that story today, guys. So, in 1975, Travis Walton went to work as usual with 6 of his work colleagues. They were working in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Springerville, Arizona. Travis's best friend, Mike Rogers, owned the company and had employed Travis. Mike had been doing forestry work for the United States Forestry Service, and this contract had lasted for about 9 years. On Mike's team that day, along with Travis, there would be Ken Peterson, John Gillette, Steve Pierce, Alan Dallas, and Dwayne Smith. Travis would go on to say that the reason they were doing this work was to stop wildfires and to also take away the trees that weren't grown as well, that were stunting the growth of the better trees that would be cut down for timber in future. Now all these guys knew each other, they socialised outside of work, and they all lived in a town called Snowflake, Arizona. So Travis, Mike and all the other guys had been working all day, and when it came to around 6 p.m, they decided to call it a day and head back home. So they packed up all their tools and all piled into Mike Rogers' double cab truck. And this is where that story really takes off, guys. So on their drive back, they spot what they think is campers, and it's a very, very dim light. But they're thinking to themselves, oh, it must be someone camping out here. As we're driving up, we'll probably see more. Now the light kind of starts to get a little bit brighter. One of them thinks it's the sun, but it's not. They said it can't be the sun. The sun set half an hour ago. They thought, is it the moon? But they look up to the sky and they see the moon on the other side, a total different direction to where this light is coming from. So they're like, what the hell is that? Is that maybe lightning that struck a tree? Is a tree on fire? Or is it a plane crash? What is this? So as they're driving up, they're all kind of like having a look, trying to look out the windows to see what this is. And the light's just getting brighter and brighter. And they see that it's not coming from below the trees, it's coming from above. Hence why they thought lightning maybe struck a tree. So they're getting closer and closer and closer, and they're looking and looking, and they're thinking, wait, what the hell is that? That's not lightning, that's not the sun, that's not a moon, that's not a plane crash. What is that? So now they're right up against this thing, and they have an unobstructed view. They can see this thing, and they're in shock, absolute shock. They cannot believe what they're looking at. And one of the guys shouts out, "That's a flying saucer." They're all staring at this craft just floating above these trees, and they cannot fathom what they are seeing. We would describe it as a glassy looking disc that was metallic, but it also had this beautiful glow coming from within it. And they were staring at this thing, jaws dropped, and Travis, he was a bit of a adrenaline junkie, decides to get out the car and take a further look at this thing. Everyone else in the car are saying, no, don't get out. Do not get out the bloody car. We're leaving. Don't get out the car. They're looking in amazement at this thing, but they're frightened. But Travis is like, no, it's fine. I'm getting out. I'm going to have a look at this thing. So he gets out and walks towards the craft. They are all shouting at him to get back into the car, but he's not listening to them. He wants to go out. He's never seen anything like this. He wants to look up at this thing with his own eyes in amazement. So Travis is underneath this thing now, and he's looking up, and the beautiful lights and the metallic, it's just swirling above his head. They're all, again, screaming, Travis, get in the bloody car, get in the car. But he's not listening. Then all of a sudden, Travis and the guys would say they heard a buzzing sound. And when they heard this, they all got really frightened. Even Travis himself said he got pretty spooked when this craft started spinning and making this weird buzzing sound. So Travis decides, okay, I'm going back to the car. I'm going back to the truck. But as he's about to leave and walk back to the truck from underneath this craft, a bright light shines down from the bottom of the craft and hits Travis and sends him hurtling into the air. The guys are screaming, he's dead, it got him, it's killed him. And they want to get out, they want to see if their friend's okay, but these guys are terrified. They're terrified if they get out, they're going to be next.
What the hell's he doing out there?
Get back to the truck!
What the hell is that?
Trevor!
Back in the truck!
Get out of there!
What is it? I don't know what that is.
Hey, Mike! Travis, get out of there!
Leave this son of a bitch here if he's gonna be an asshole.
Travis,
Get back here!
Travis!
So the crew, after seeing Travis get blasted by this light beam, think they've just witnessed their friend's death. Travis would go on to say that when he was hit with this light, he doesn't recall anything. He said it was like everything just stopped. He can't remember anything. But his friends were convinced. They were convinced that this craft had sent out this beam and had killed their friend. And through all fear, the fear of it happening to one of them too, they decided to floor it and sped that truck out of there. They were driving down the road and they're all panicked. And Mike stopped the truck and he said, we've got to go back. We've got to go back for Travis's body. We can't just leave his body lying in the forest. We've got to go back. And they were more concerned about the condition that Travis's body would be in. They thought that it would have a blast through it because of this beam. The other guys, they didn't want to go back. They're like, no, let's just head into town, we'll get help there. But Mike's like, no, I'm not just going to leave him lying in the woods. We've got to go back. If you guys want to get out of the truck and wait at the side of the road if you are too scared, I'll go back and get Travis's body and then I'll pick his up on the way back. But the guys were having none of that. They didn't want to get out of this truck. They didn't want to be out in the dark, standing in the forest, with this craft out there. So they're like, no. So they all stayed in the truck. So they went back to collect Travis's body, frightened of what condition he was going to be in. And when they got back there, they're looking around, the craft's not there anymore, but neither is Travis's body. Travis had vanished. The guys got out the truck, they're looking all over this area for where Travis was. They can't find him anywhere. And they're thinking to themselves, crap, the crafts took him. Either that or he's mortally wounded and he's staggered into this forest. So they decide that they need help. They need help. So they get back in the truck and head to town to get a hold of the sheriff. So about 7:30 p.m, an hour and a half after they had finished their job, were driving home, spotted this craft. One of the workers, called Ken Peterson, gets in touch with the sheriff. He describes everything that they had seen, that they had came upon this craft, that Travis had got out of the truck, that the craft had blasted Travis with this light, that they thought it had killed him, that they, out of fear, had floored it, but they went back, and when they went back, the craft was gone, and so was Travis. So the police asked them to come and meet them for an interview, and they meet Deputy Sheriff Chuck Ellison. So they're relaying the story to the sheriff, telling him exactly what happened, and the sheriff could see that these guys were in shock. Some of them were even in tears, describing what had happened to their friend Travis. Now, Sheriff Ellison's very sceptical at this point, because these guys are saying their friend got shot down by a UFO, and yeah, it does sound a bit nuts. So he's thinking, okay, yeah, these guys have lost the plot. Their friend has been shot by a UFO. So he's very skeptical about this. And he's thinking that this is a cover story, that Travis was actually killed by his co-workers, by his friends, and this was the cover story that they were going to use to try and get away with the murder of Travis Walton. So he's thinking these guys are making up this lunatic story to cover for murdering someone. Now, although Sheriff Ellison was very sceptical regarding the story, because this story does sound crazy, he did say that these men were so convincing that he even found himself kind of believing them, because they were just so convincing, so panicked, and you could see the fear in their faces. And he would say that if they were lying, they were very good actors. So Sheriff Ellison decides he needs help, so he calls him back up, and more police officers arrive and they separate the guys and take further statements. They decide to launch a search for Travis, and they have Mike take them to the place where they last seen Travis. And when they get up there, they're looking around, but they can't see any physical evidence. They expected to see at least a body imprint of Travis, of where Travis landed on the ground. The way that his co-workers had described the veracity in which Travis had been picked up and thrown on the ground, there should have been some kind of imprint or disturbance, but they couldn't find anything. They're looking all over the area, and at this point the police, they're not believing that these guys' story at all. They think now these guys have killed Travis and came up with this UFO story to cover their tracks. Now, the police would bring in volunteers to do an extensive search of the area and surrounding areas of where Travis's workmates and friends had claimed his body had landed, but they couldn't find anything. There was no physical evidence. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. And at this point, I think the police genuinely believed they weren't looking for Travis as a live person anymore. They were now looking for a dead body, and they were checking the ground to see if there were any disturbances, to see if a grave had been dug, but again they couldn't find anything. So the next day after the incident, we're on November 8th now. Travis's brother has joined the search, and the police now have helicopters. They have off-the-road vehicles. They have more people to go and look in this area to find Travis. But again, there's absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And due to the vastness of the search, people in the town are starting to catch on as to what's going on. And with that, the media also caught on. And the media descended on Snowflake like the plague, because this was a fantastical story that a UFO had killed and taken someone, or that these men had killed their friend and hid the body and are using this UFO story to cover it up. Now, because of the media attention surrounding this story, people were descending on Snowflake. They were descending, trying to figure out what happened to Travis, if this really was a UFO, what the hell was going on. And one of the people who had arrived was a UFO researcher from Phoenix called Fred Sylvanus, and he went on to interview Mike and Dwayne to get their account of what happened to Travis that night. Mike and Dwayne were going to tell this researcher what had happened to Travis, and they would also say that they were worried that the police weren't taking this seriously, and they were worried what Travis was going through at this time. They didn't know if he was alive or dead. They didn't know what was happening to him. They were worried. They were worried what had happened to him. If he was dead, where was his body? But they felt that the police were brushing all this aside and going with their own theories of what had happened, and that the police were now convinced that Travis was dead, and that was why they weren't out there searching as much, because they didn't feel like there was a live person out there that needed serious help, and they just wanted to find their friend. So the police, sceptical of the stories coming from Travis's workmates, decide to bring in a polygraph analyst called Cy Gilson to administer polygraph tests to see if these guys were either making the story up, if they had killed Travis, or if they were telling the truth. So they're all men. They decided, we've got nothing to hide, so and decided they were going to do these polygraphs. So some of the questions that they were asked was, had any of them ever hurt Travis before? Did they know where Travis's body was buried? Was this UFO real? Now all the 6 men took this polygraph test and answered these questions, and they denied knowing what had happened to Travis. They denied having harmed Travis. They said that this UFO was responsible for what had happened to Travis, and 5 out of the 6 of them had passed. They had passed the polygraph test. They were telling the truth. And Alan Dallas, his test came back inconclusive. So the police thought there was maybe a little more there as to why his test didn't come back as truthful. It didn't come back that he was lying. It just came back that it was inconclusive. They couldn't tell either way if he was telling the truth or he was being deceptive. After the guys had took the polygraph test, Sheriff Gillespie was beginning to believe their story more and more. Because 5 of them being conclusive and passing that test. You know, I know polygraph tests they're not 100%, but 5 of them passing, that's pretty significant. So Sheriff Gillespie was now on the side of, these guys believe what they're saying. These guys believe that a UFO has taken their friend. So while Travis's work colleagues are dealing with that, we're going to move on now to what Travis actually experienced, what Travis went through during his time when he'd been hit by this light beam and scooped up by this craft. So let's begin with Travis's account. So as I said, after Travis had been hit by the light beam, he started to gain consciousness, and he recalls that he was in an extreme amount of pain. He said that he felt like his whole body was on fire, his skin, and even it felt like he said that it was coming from the inside of his body. It was his whole body just literally was in searing pain. And this caused him to kind of phase in and out of consciousness. But when he did manage to open his eyes and kind of look about to get his bearing of where he was, he knew that he was lying on some sort of bed, some sort of table, and he assumed that he actually was in a hospital. He assumed that he had been hit by maybe something like lightning or something, and his friends had rushed him to hospital. He's looking up and his eyes are very hazy and he sees this very dim light, but he's also having a great difficulty breathing. He said that the air was so thin that he literally was struggling to get a breath, and he didn't think anything of it to begin with, because he thought with whatever had happened to him, whatever had caused him to be in this extreme amount of pain, maybe it had damaged or crushed his lungs, and that's why he was finding it difficult to breathe. So as he's opening his eyes and he's kind of looking about, he can see movement in this dark little room, and he can see these 3 kind of figures that are kind of coming forward to him, and he assumes these are doctors or nurses, because he genuinely thinks he must be in the hospital. He thinks that and he said this, he actually thought he was dying because he was in so much pain. Now as these figures came closer and closer and closer, Travis knew he wasn't in a hospital. And when he saw these figures for what they really looked like, he knew they weren't human. These creatures, as he would call them, were terrifying. Now as Travis is lying on this this metal table. He said that these creatures, one of them was just staring at him intently, and he was looking at it and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He started to panic. He looked at the side of him and he could see the other two, but they were just staring at him. They weren't talking. They were freaking him out. And he would say that these creatures looked hideous. Their eyes were massive, and he just had never seen anything like this in his life. And pure panic and fear set in. When Travis described these creatures, he said they were about 3 to 4 feet tall. They had a large cranium, large dark almond eyes. They had arms, they had legs, and he said they had fingers on their hands, but they were very thin. There didn't seem to be any muscle mass. And even though they would look kind of humanoid, they kind of didn't either. He would go on to say that they had greyish kind of skin, and they were just absolutely terrifying and hideous to look at. At this point, Travis's fight or flight had kicked in. He knew that he was in trouble. He didn't know what these creatures were going to do to him. All he knew is that he'd woke up on some kind of metal table. He didn't know if it was an operating table. He didn't know what it was, but he just thought, I'm in serious trouble here, and I'm in danger. And he decided he was going to fight. He decided, I'm not going to let these things anywhere near me. I'm going to fight my way out. And if I can fight my way out of here, hopefully I can find a way, a door, something to get out of this bloody place and get home. Travis manages to pull himself off this bed. He's so weak, but the adrenaline is kicked in. He gets himself off this metal table and he grabs a metal cylinder that's on a shelf at the side of this table. And as he's doing that, these 3 creatures start walking towards them. And when they do that, Travis starts swinging. He's screaming at these creatures, I'll fucking kill you. Stay away from me, I'll kill you. When the creatures saw how agitated and angry Travis was, they fled. They turned round and ran out the room. Travis would say his entire encounter with these 3 creatures that they didn't speak to him, they didn't speak to each other, they didn't even say anything when they left the room, which made Travis believe that they must talk to each other telepathically. So now that these creatures had left the room, Travis thought, this is my time to make my getaway. He leaves the room and walks down a hallway. He enters a room that's almost spherical, he says. And in this room, there's a small chair and there's a console kind of thing with all these buttons and lights, etc. And he would say that there was also a kind of sphere in the middle of the room that had what looked like to him like a star map. He walked up to this console and he thought, if I push one of these, surely a door will open and I can just fall to the ground and get out of here. Because he's thinking that he's in this craft and the craft is still hovering above the forest where he was, where he saw it. And he thought if he could just get a door open, he could just jump out onto the ground and make a run for it. So he's pushing all these buttons. He sits down in the chair and he says on the chair there was almost like mouldings where you would place your hands. And when he put his hands there, he said that lights came on around the chair, and regarding whatever direction he pushed his hands, the star map would change and the lights would change different directions. Now he's trying everything in this room to try and get some door open, but nothing's happening. So he realises, no, I can't stay in here. I'm not getting anywhere. I have to just go and try and find another exit. So he goes back out into the hallway and starts making his way down. And as he's walking down, he comes into contact with another being. And he thinks this being is a person. He thinks that this is someone that came to rescue him. And this being had what he described as a helmet on, almost like what astronauts wear. And he's asking this being, it was a male, questions, and this being looked human. He was about 5'7", 5'8", blonde hair, blue, very blue eyes, thin. And Travis is asking him, are you here to help me? Where are we? How do we get out of here? But the being's not, this guy, who Travis assumes it is, isn't saying anything to him. Travis assumes, because, or maybe he can't hear me because he's got this helmet on, and decides just to follow him because he's looking at this person and he looks human to him, and that's kind of giving Travis a little bit of comfort. And he's thinking that this is people from his race here to rescue him. His friends must have went and got help, and this was the army or something that have came in and descended upon this ship, and they're inside now. They've gained entry, and they're here to rescue him, to get him out. So he's following behind this guy, and still trying to ask questions, hoping that maybe he will hear him. He doesn't know. He's just very on edge at this point, but he's feeling a little bit more comfortable because he thinks he's with another human being. So this being takes Travis into what's a larger room, a larger type hangar room. And Travis is wondering, okay, is this the way out? This is the way we must be going. And he sees three other humanoid like people in this room, and these people don't have this space helmet on. They all look very similar. There's a woman with them and two men, and he's looking and he notices that they all have blonde hair, they all have blue eyes, they look what he thinks is like a family. And he's wondering, okay, like, if these people are here to rescue me, like, where's their insignias on their uniform? They're wearing these coveralls that don't seem to have any type of zips, or they don't have any stitching. And he goes up to these other beings who don't have the helmet on, and he starts asking them questions because he's thinking they don't have this helmet on, so they can't hear me. And he's asking them, where am I? Are you here to rescue me? What's going on? What were those creatures? Please, can you just get me out of here? But they're not saying anything to him. Again, they're just staring at him. And he asked them, please, can you answer me? Please just tell me what is going on here. But they don't say anything. And the female ushers Travis towards another metal table that's been brought in. And Travis starts freaking out again. He's thinking, hell no, you're not putting me back on there so those little creatures can do what they were about to do to me. But this woman's ushering him to like lie on the table, and you can see that they're kind of getting a bit impatient with him. So he's thinking to himself, okay, these people look human, so maybe I should just do it, because what else am I going to do? Maybe they're going to sneak me out of the ship. He doesn't know what the hell's going on at this point. So he gets back on the table and they give him some kind of what he would say was anaesthetic, because at this point as well he's still in a severe amount of pain, but he's not even thought about that. The adrenaline has just taken over, and the fear that he's in is just, it's overwhelming for him. So they put this kind of mask over his face, and he notices that there's no leads, there's no hoses, nothing attached to this. And he's wondering, why are they doing this? You know, it's just a mask, there's nothing attached to it. What's it going to do? And when it's placed over his face, he passes out. He doesn't remember anything. Whatever must have been, or whatever this mask was, it knocked him clean out, like a general anaesthetic. So again, Travis would start to come to. He would start to open his eyes and yeah, come to from whatever had knocked him out. And he could feel that below him was pavement. That he was no longer on this metal table. He could feel the cold wind against his skin. And he looked around and noticed that he was in a gas station in Heber, Arizona. And the relief that he felt, the air as well, just felt so much easier to breathe. He didn't even care that he had been dropped off miles from his home. He was just happy to be back on ground. He was just happy to be out of this ship, away from these creatures. He was happy that this nightmare, this horrible nightmare that he just experienced, he was happy that he was away from it. And as Travis was looking around trying to get his bearings, he looked up at the sky and he actually saw the craft. He saw it shoot up right into the sky and disappear with no sound, nothing. Travis managed to get himself standing up, and he noticed that there was phone booths, and he stumbled over and went to the first one and it was out of order. He went to the second one, luckily it was working, and he called his brother-in-law, Grant Neff. At this point it was 12:05 a.m. and Travis assumed that this was still the same day. This was still the same day that he'd been hit by the blast and knocked unconscious. So when Grant answered the phone, Travis says to him, at this Exxon station in Heber, and can you come and get me? And Grant was like, who is this? He actually thought it was a prank call. And Travis said to him, no, it's not a prank call. This is Travis. At this gas station, can you come and get me? And Grant was like, Travis, where have you been? And Travis was like, what do you mean? I'll explain everything when I get home. Now Grant, still kind of sceptical that this was Travis, decided to go and get Travis's brother Dwayne. And when he told him about the call, Dwayne was like, yeah, that's a prank caller. That can't be Travis, because Travis has obviously been missing for days, 5 days, and they all, to be honest, they all thought Travis was dead at this point. And Dwayne wasn't happy about this. Dwayne thought, who the hell's actually calling my family, pretending to be my brother? That's just sick. And he was kind of pissed. He was really pissed about this. So Dwayne and Grant, they decide to investigate this, because obviously the caller had told them where he was. So they get in the car and they drive the 33 miles from Snowflake to Heber to see who this was, to see who this is. And when they get to the gas station, they are so surprised to see Travis. The two of them get out the car and they run towards him, and they're like, Travis, where have you been? Where have you been? We've been searching for you. Where the hell have you been? Everybody has been so worried about you. And Travis is looking at them all confused. What do you mean, where have I been? Travis literally thinks he's only been gone for a couple of hours. And he says that to them. I've been gone a couple of hours. And they look at him and they're like, no, Travis, you've been gone for 5 days. Travis is in actual disbelief when they tell him this. He honestly believed he had only been gone a couple of hours. And when he found out he had literally been gone for 5 days, that he'd been aboard this craft for 5 days, it just put him into more shock. So they take Travis home, and because the news media is all over this town and all over this story, they pick up pretty quick and report that Travis has been found 5 days after he'd been reported missing. And Sheriff Gillespie, his theory was that Travis had been hit on the head and drugged, and they had taken him to a hospital, and his story of what he had saw with these creatures had actually been him drugged out his mind and confused the hospital staff as these creatures, and confused the hospital as being on board a UFO. But Travis would deny this, and he had a hospital examination, and that hospital examination found no signs of head trauma, and he done toxicology on him, and there were no drugs in his system. But you know what the authorities are like. They want to rule everything out. They tend to go to the most reasonable explanation, and they thought it was reasonable that Travis had been hit on the head, drugged, and had confused where he was with these creatures and the ship. But Travis has vehemently denied that this was a head injury, that he was drugged and taken to a hospital. And Travis even offered the police that he would take a lie detector test to prove that what he was saying had happened to him. And Travis has now taken a couple of lie detector tests, and up until this day, he's passed all of them. So in addition to the polygraph test, Travis also agreed to go down to Scottsdale, Arizona, to a PRO consultancy where a guy called James Hardy hypnotised Travis to regress him to find out what actually happened during the 5 days that he was missing. And while under hypnosis, Travis can only remember 2 hours out of the 5 days that he was gone. And those 2 hours happened to be the 2 hours that he was awake and fought off those creatures and followed the man in the helmet to this hangar, etc. But he also remembered other smaller details while under hypnosis, which helped him to kind of come to terms with what had happened to him. Because this hypnosis was done in a way that he wasn't overwhelmed and wouldn't have to relive the trauma of that event. And I also want to add that before Travis had went under hypnosis, what had happened to him on the ship when he had fought those creatures, he couldn't remember any of that. He didn't recall any of that until he went under hypnosis, and that's when he recalled what happened when he'd been awake on this ship. And as I said, all he can remember out of those entire 5 days is 2 hours. Now, in the end, even though Travis has undergone numerous polygraph tests, went under hypnosis, there's still people out there that don't believe what happened to him. There's debunkers and skeptics that pick apart his story and try to prove it as being false. Many people who are skeptic believe that Travis was obsessed with UFOs, that he basically pulled off this stunt to become famous, to make a name for himself, to make money. And there are some people that do believe him, that totally believe that that this happened to him because he passed these polygraph tests, and his friends also passed the polygraph tests, and they think that surely not all of them could have been in on this, because it kind of ruined some of their lives. And I guess that's for you guys to decide. Do you believe Travis? Or do you think that he's made all this up for money and fame? Please let me know in the comments what you think. And until next time, I'll see y'all later. Bye guys.